Front and left here.
In case you have an empty seat next to you.
Plenty
You're
of
standing up.
Tom?
Is there assigned seating?
No, you
Next
guys
to
are
me. Yeah.
So good evening and welcome. My name is Leslie Kimball and I'm the library director. The Wiggin Memorial Library has made it a priority to be a center for community information, and in that spirit we have hosted over 20 voter information nights. Tonight we're going to begin with the candidates for New Hampshire Senate, who you see before you. They'll each take a few minutes to introduce themselves and talk about their top priority if they're elected. Then we're going to take questions from all of you. We will be following a timed format for that. We're going to look for probably about maybe your question fitting in about 30 seconds, which I know sounds short, but believe me, if you've ever had to stand up in front of people and say something for 30 seconds, it's longer than you think. And then we'll be able to have both of our candidates give an answer to that to make out kind of our other minute, and then hopefully move on. We'd like to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have. Both of our candidates have graciously come here after being in Rye and before going to Newton. So we really want to keep them on schedule so they can get every place they need to go. So we're going to try to wrap that up around 7:25 tonight. Once these guys move on to their next event, we'll move on to our New Hampshire House of Representative candidates. Going to be the same format. So I do ask everyone who's speaking questions or candidates, be brief. You know, brevity is the whatever it is that quote is. Just be brief. That's all you need to know. You should have audience etiquette cards. If you don't have one, we can get you one, so that you know the candidates also have etiquette lists of things. A very important thing on these is at the very top, and I have stolen this shamelessly from our Stratham town moderator, Dave Emanuel, who says it at the beginning of every town meeting. Rule number 1, the moderator makes and enforces all the rules, and rule number 2, see rule number 1. So please do not take it personally if I interrupt you or I ask you to stop. It's just because that's my rule, and that's how we're playing tonight. Just want to mention that Mike and Jean are here doing our recording, as they've done very kindly for us in the past, which means we will be able to put this up on YouTube. We'll be sharing that link. We'll also have a DVD in the library that will be circulating, so you can come and check that out if you'd like. So please let neighbors or friends know if they weren't able to make it tonight that they will be able to find the information there. I definitely want to thank our candidates and our audience members for your participation in the political process. It doesn't happen without every single one of you, and I'm very grateful. We did do a random drawing to see what order people would go in. So for our Senate candidates, the person who will go first is Dr. Tom Sherman, and he'll be followed by Dan Innes. So take it away.
Thank you. And in case somebody wanted one, our literature came in a little bit late, so it's out on the table now. My name is Dr. Tom Sherman. I'm a gastroenterologist with Core Gastroenterology at Exeter Hospital. I was a state rep for Rye and Newcastle from 2012 to 2016. And I currently serve on 2 commissions ongoing in Concord. One is on the Cancer Cluster, for which I was chair of the Cancer Cluster Task Force under both Governor Sununu and Governor Hassan. And also a commission that looks at environmentally triggered diseases. That also came out of the work on the Cancer Cluster. I'm running for state senate, and probably the best reason is demonstrated by what happened Saturday night. I was on call at the hospital, and I'm a gastroenterologist, as I mentioned, and a patient came in with some bleeding. I was called in around 8:30, and by 2 o'clock in the morning we had him completely stabilized, and he's doing well. So had that patient come in with an opioid overdose, he would have gotten his Narcan and been discharged with no follow-up. Had that patient come in, and this isn't, I'm not talking about Exeter alone, this is true across the state. Had that patient come in with a life-threatening illness, which we all know as depression, wanting to kill himself, he would have been brought back into the hospital. If he was felt to be a danger to himself, he would have been committed, not allowed to leave, and he would have sat in the ER for up to 3 weeks waiting for treatment. That's the way we treat people in New Hampshire. While I was out canvassing, I ran into a woman when I was talking to her about the mental health crisis and people who were in psychiatric crisis. She told me, "You're preaching to the choir. My brother just got into Hampstead Hospital, but he waited 3 weeks in a hospital out west towards Keene." This has been the case in New Hampshire, getting worse for years. We've had a 10-year plan that was started in 2008 for mental illness and behavioral health. We've never implemented it. We're just looking at our new 10-year plan, and the reason I'm running is to make sure we implement that fully, so that people, 40 to 60 people a night are waiting in our ERs for a mental health bed. Opioid crisis continues to kill our young people, and it needs to stop. I have a history of healthcare leadership, legislative leadership, and with your help, I can do this. Thank you.
Jan?
All right, thank you. Many of you know me, but in case you don't, I'm going to take you through an abridged version of my life. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, in a working class family. My father was a printer, and my mother worked part-time when we needed to get over the hump and maybe make a mortgage payment. And I remember as a boy sitting in the back seat of the car one day, and Mom and Dad were discussing which bill doesn't get paid this month. Will it be the house payment, the electric bill, or the gas bill? The decision that day was the gas bill, because we wanted to keep the house, and the gas company gives you about 3 months to catch up on your bills. And that's how dire it was. I got new clothes once a year thanks to the generosity of my grandparents. We went every fall to get those clothes, and they had to last you for a year. But I was very, very fortunate. I had 5 great-grandparents until I was in my late teens. The last one passed away when I was 36 years old. My last grandfather passed away just 5 years ago. He was one of my mentors in life. I grew up with tremendous family values and a family so filled with love I can't describe it. And we're all still very close together. But it was a hard existence. I went to a major city's public schools, and I learned. And then we moved to Lancaster, Ohio, which is where I graduated from high school. My dad just started a business, and there was no money to put Dan through college. I'm the first in my family to go. I received a scholarship, a couple of federal grants. I worked and worked and worked. I paid off my last student loan when I was 38 years old. I had already accepted my first dean's job at a major university. My PhD came in 1991 in business, and it served me well. My point to all of this is that I understand the struggles of many of the New Hampshire families because I grew up in those struggles. No one in my family was rich, and we had to work for what we had. And I grew up with a beautiful set of ethics and values. Once I got into higher education and started to broaden my perspective, I got into small businesses and eventually got into service in the Senate, which has been extremely rewarding. My mother told me, and we kind of negotiated it, I may talk about that at the end, that one of the reasons we're here on this planet is to help others and to serve others. And I get no greater satisfaction than doing that. I think I have the right set of skills and experience to understand the interplay between public policy and our business climate, which is critical for employment and critical for lifting all of us up into a better economy and better lives. So as we look forward to about a little less than 2 weeks from now, I do hope you'll give me strong consideration when you walk into the voting booth. I look forward to your questions.
All right, here's how it goes. You're welcome to ask a question. It's great if you want to raise your hand. If that makes you feel too much like elementary school, just go ahead and stand up, and I'll just kind of give you a nod or something like that. If we're reaching kind of the outer edge of our time limit, whether for questions or answers, you will get a 30-second, Joanne has a 30-second thing. I should have told her to sit in the front, and I didn't. If we reach our limit, I do have a sorry button. So
I like
it's,
this.
again,
This is a good one.
nothing personal, but we'll all know that we're pretty much there. Go ahead and finish, obviously, the sentence that you're working on.
But just that sentence.
But we will go there. Just that sentence.
Got it.
Hopefully it's not because that wouldn't be so good. So we would love to hear some questions for Dan and Tom Sherman. Go ahead, Mike.
I appreciate very much what you said about your values and the spirit of helping people. This election cycle, I received more negative advertisements in my mailbox than ever before.
Yeah.
All of them aimed at the person sitting to your right.
Yes.
I wonder if you would like to comment on any of that.
I would. I'd be happy to. And the unfortunate thing, and you know, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, the two of us, before I extended the dinner invitation. None of us likes this. And oftentimes the mailers come from a party or some other outside entity that attacks us or attacks the other person, and we are not allowed to talk to them by law. Last election cycle, Planned Parenthood said there was only one person running in this race who supported a woman's right to choose. Flat out lie, and they mailed that 3 times. Tom couldn't control that. So I didn't blame him. I blame Planned Parenthood for telling a lie. But you know, there was one that came today that just annoys me, and it's not from Tom. Dan Innes is not a medical expert. I have never claimed to be a medical expert. I have said that I have a PhD in business, which is a doctorate, but I've never said I was a medical expert. On the back of this, it says I voted against paid family and medical leave. It has a little number 1 footnote. I can't find the footnote on the card. Where's the damn footnote? I did not do that. Number 2, I voted against health care protections for pre-existing conditions. My father had kidney stones, owned his own business. Second time he got them, he was dumped by his carrier. He couldn't find another carrier. Finally, he found one. They put a rider on his kidneys and said, we'll insure everything except your kidneys. To believe that I would vote against pre-existing conditions, it's unbelievable to me. Against insurance coverage for mothers and newborns, no way. So don't believe what you get. If I'm sending you something, it will be true and verifiable with footnotes on the card.
Okay.
Thank you for your question.
Dr. Sherman.
Last election cycle, as many of you know, I stayed completely positive. That's the way I like to be. That's the way I approach life. I learned a hard lesson, and that's that sometimes you have to point out differences. So what's within the control of my campaign has been what's called contrast, which is saying the way Dan voted and the way I voted and my strengths and the areas where he voted. In fact, there's no personal attacks in any of the mail that's come from my campaign. On the other hand, at the end of the last campaign, about 4 days before, when I had no time to reply, his campaign, not the Republican Party, sent one of the most nasty mailings I've ever received, and it was just an outright lie about an abortion statistics bill.
30 seconds.
I took that bill, worked across the lines with pro-life people and with Planned Parenthood, and made sure providers and patients were completely de-identified and aggregated, and that the information would go away. I never thought that something that was so much what you all have asked for, which is where you work with people who have a completely different ideology and find common ground, would actually be used against me, and Dan did. That'd be
Thank
nice.
you.
I like an apology. Thank you.
We also have a no button in the library, but that seemed like it was taking a little
Yeah.
too far. Other questions?
One of the issues that you hear occasionally in the state here is about turning New Hampshire into a sanctuary state. So I'd like to hear both of your arguments for or against that, and why you hold those arguments. And then, depending upon how you answer, I'd like to offer a follow-up question.
I think is it your
Go
turn?
ahead.
Yeah, I'll answer that. We don't have any cities in our district. We don't have any cities in our district. We have 11 towns. This never really crossed my radar until it was brought up. And we're a state that has always prided itself, even to the point of prevention training for opioid addiction, on not micromanaging towns, municipalities, and cities. We let them make their own decisions. So I think, number one, this is a federal issue. Number two, I have seen incredible bills die because we don't micromanage our towns. And I am not going to start doing that now because of one issue.
Okay. Quickly, I do have a copy of the amendment to the bill that Dr. Sherman was talking about, my negative mailer on, with some highlights. If you want to have a look at it at the end, I'll leave it. Secondly, with sanctuary cities, I absolutely do not support them. I think it is an unbelievable concept, and there's no place for it in New Hampshire. In the event a city tries to do it, or a town, I will do everything in my power as a state senator to stop it. Period.
Maybe I was a little unclear, it's not really a follow-up, but there are people talking about making the whole state a sanctuary state.
No.
I don't think we have that power anyway.
Great. Other questions?
Dr. Sherman, you talked about a 10-year mental health plan that's never being implemented and time for another 10-year plan. I'm not clear on who designed the plan and what power as state senators you would have to implement that plan or a new plan to come.
That's a good question. I guess it's me first,
Yeah, it's
isn't
you
it?
first.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and the Senate actually does have some ability there. My sense is, how old is that report, Tom?
Well, the first one's 2008 to 2018.
Yeah, so we're at the end of it. We need a new one. A lot has changed in the last 10 years, the opioid crisis being one of those things. And, there are many things that are always moving targets. So we need to update the plan. And I would support establishing a commission or a committee that would do just that. And then it's up to the legislature to work with the governor to begin to implement that plan, depending on what the outcome is. I don't think we can waste any time, given the fact the plan expires this year. We need to get on it immediately when we get back to Concord. And I'd be happy to work with you or anyone to draft legislation to start to require that commission to redevelop and get a good plan going.
So I don't think it really is an issue of needing much legislation as much as it is needing funding. And that's an issue of priorities. So the actual implementation of this is done through the Department of Health and Human Service for the most part. So when you look at the current situation, what we have is we have people sitting in New Hampshire Hospital, which is our state mental hospital, with nowhere to go because the outpatient services are not robust enough to support them. So that's the issue. Really starts with funding. So the steps would be, the old plan expires this year, and it really is outdated. It was written in 2008 by really wonderful people, but the state of the art has changed. The new plan is right in the midst of about to be approved, and once it's approved, then the funding would be the major issue, not so much needing to put in enabling legislation, although if there were any enabling legislation necessary, it certainly would be supporting that. But the number one thing is making sure it's covered in the budget.
I don't disagree.
Another question?
Yes, thank you. I have, until recently, been a lifelong Republican voter. But in recent years, I've become a strong proponent for green justice, that is preserving our planet, and immigration justice, which we all are aware of is badly in need of addressing at local, state, and federal levels. I'd like to hear from both of you on your positions on both of these subjects.
I'll start with green, which I'm assuming you mean environmental issues. I'll sort of answer it the way I answered a similar question in Rye. I believe that, actually it's interesting, I was talking to a professor at Sloan today at MIT who is one of the world's experts on the economic impact of climate change, and her comment was that climate change is not a belief system, it's a fact. And if you look at the science behind it, it's not really equivocal. And whether man has caused this or not is also not really debatable. It's people who say there are fluctuations. Her comment is, if you're looking at natural cycles of cooling and warming, we'd actually be in a cooling cycle. And our warming cycle is off the charts. So the first thing is, I'm going to try to make this really brief.
There's
So-
two questions in there.
Yeah, I know. So we are on the coast. Stratham isn't, but we're very much surrounded by water. And any fisherman or lobsterman will tell you that they've seen remarkable changes in even the last couple of years. We have to implement our coastal risk and hazards recommendations. That's step one. That's a commission that came out about 2 years ago that is up to date. And that's the first step I would take. Oh. All right.
Could we maybe respectfully double this one since it's
Yeah,
two questions?
absolutely.
Okay.
So why don't you answer green and then
Okay,
I'll
sure.
answer the,
Just trying
Happy
to
to
get
do
you
it.
guys out of here on time.
right.
This past summer, I spent 2.5 weeks out west, and a week of that was spent in Glacier Park. And it was too cold to get up to Grinnell Glacier, and there was too much snow. That's not related to climate change. Climate change is real. Climate is always changing. I am a strong proponent of protecting our environment. We have to be pragmatic in how we do it and sensible in how we do it. But I want to reduce pollution. I want to reduce CO2 emissions. Automobiles are the largest contributor of CO2 to the atmosphere. So we're all guilty sitting in here right now. And we do have to find a way to leave less of a footprint on this earth, or we're going to use it all up. I believe we need to do this incrementally as we see change happening, and not build the wall along the sea for 50 years from now, but for 5 years from now, as we can predict things pretty tightly. I can't say enough how much I believe in protecting our environment. The United States has the cleanest air in the world. There's a map you can find online. We can't do this alone. China and India are destroying the atmosphere. We've got to do this globally. We need to contribute, and I support that, but we can't go it alone.
May I ask a follow-up, just a brief follow-up?
Okay, I was also going to ask Dr. Sherman, since I cut him off, do you have one more thing you want to add to the green question?
Well, the most important part for the state of New Hampshire is that we import most of our energy from outside the state. With the state of the art right now, we can really, through two mechanisms, really shift that balance and make it an internal economy. So one is really promoting and utilizing fully renewables, but more importantly is making sure that we insulate our homes and do everything we possibly can to decrease use. And that is a very solid, big return on investment step to make. Not just insulating your homes, but all the forms of decreasing our consumption.
I agree.
So this is great for our state economy if we actually fully implement it.
Immigration?
You have a choice. You
Well-
can either have your
Follow-up
follow-up on
Follow-up
environment.
to green justice.
Okay.
Our current governor and his dad were science deniers,
Right.
big time. And And so I guess I would ask how we're going to influence, especially if Governor Sununu is reelected, how we're going to influence him to get on board with this, what I believe is a very important issue for our globe.
Is this me first? Sure. I think the most important thing to do is make your arguments with facts and present the facts to the governor. He and I have a good relationship. I don't think he knows quite how environmentally conscious I am. But the governor will often listen to facts and data. And I have a research doctorate, so I have the ability to understand and interpret some of that data. It is not in the environmental sciences, but I do understand how to read a research report. And I think I can make that sort of communication to him. It's more than just him, though. You have other members of the legislature, probably some on both sides of the aisle, who need persuading as well. I think the question is going to come down to, do we want to subsidize certain types of energy? That's an open question that I'm not prepared to answer here, but I will tell you I supported the biomass bill to try to have an alternative source of energy for us here in our state, and I think that's important to our future.
I think that it is frustrating when, you know, there's any branch that isn't in line with the way you feel. I'd go back to the example of what we did with Medicaid expansion, for example. When we did that, we had a Republican Senate, Democrat House, and a Democrat governor. We had to find compromise. We had to work together, and in the end, I think the Medicaid expansion bill was better because of it. We put in some circuit breakers that really protected the state. The same approach with the governor is what I would use, and I think I have a good working relationship with him. Obviously, he probably would have kicked me off the Cancer Cluster Task Force, but these are things that we can do, and in the end, having that back and forth and reaching a common ground often ends up in a better solution.
He wouldn't kick you off that. You're good on it.
So I really want to respect our candidates needing to get to their next thing. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take any more questions for them. I do want to say that I know myself, reaching out to both of these campaigns and the folks who are helping them and working with them, they're incredibly responsive, which I appreciate so much from both of your offices.
And
Thank you.
I think this is probably true of both of us, but you are welcome to my cell. You can
Yes.
call Jonathan, who's somewhere back in the back. If you have questions, or if you want your immigration question, I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that.
And so any questions, please feel free to call.
Absolutely.
My cell phone number is 285-1150. Call or text. Call or text
We're all going to
anytime.
memorize.
Well, there's some people with pens.
If you have a pen, I'll give you mine.
285-1150.
And
Happy to talk with you.
I have his on speed dial.
I've got yours too. We'll use them on November 6th or 7th.
And mine is 828-9620. And happy to take any questions you might have.
And actually, we'll have those on video, I just realized.
Yeah.
So
The
you'll
whole
be able to
world
get
will
them
know
that
them.
way too.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
We may need new numbers, just like Lindsey Graham.
Our House candidates to go ahead and come up and take a seat. Doesn't matter where you sit, because we're going to have you speak in a random order anyway. Because I'm gonna let you introduce yourselves, I'm not gonna run down and say your name. So please make sure that you say your name at the beginning of your introduction. So this is the order that we're gonna go in, so you can be prepared for when you're next. Patty Lovejoy is gonna go first. Lester Cuff is second. Dan Shepard is third. Deborah Picucci, am I saying that right,
Very well,
Deborah?
very good.
Okay. Is going to
Well
be
done.
fourth. Deborah Altschiller is going to go fifth, and we're going to end with Pat Abrami. So, Patty, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Leslie, and the library staff for putting on this forum. My name is Patty Lovejoy. I am running for what New Hampshire calls a floterial seat. First of all, if you type floterial in Word, it goes, not a word, not a word. It's an at-large district. So I represent Stratham, Exeter, Newfields, and Newmarket. I've been here in Stratham for 31 years. I've been a very active member of this community. Everything from being president of the PTO to being a Cub Scout den leader for 5 years. I served on the town's financial advisory committee. And I've been on the Stratham Fair Committee for, I think, around 15 years. I see several people out here who have volunteered in the admission booth, and if you haven't had a chance and you want to, please see me afterward. I am always looking for new people. I've also done a lot of public service. I served on school board for 12 years, and I am right now completing my 4th term at the New Hampshire State House. My professional background is I was a tax CPA with the international firm of KPMG, and I was a banking executive for many years. My background has served me well at the New Hampshire State House. I currently serve on the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee does the expenditure side of the budget, and any legislation that has a price tag also comes through the Finance Committee. The best way to really understand state government is to go through the agency budgets line by line. It may not be exciting, but it's extremely informative. Prior to that, I served 2 terms on the Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee does the revenue side of the budget, any bills that have anything to do with income for the state. And during that time, I was the only person on Ways and Means that actually had a professional tax background. There are very few reps in the State House that have an in-depth knowledge of both sides of the budget. Now, it's no secret that New Hampshire has a demographic problem. We are the 2nd oldest state in the nation, second only to our next door neighbor, Maine. We need to encourage our young people to stay here in New Hampshire. And I believe one of the things that we need to do is invest more in higher education. New Hampshire is not a poor state. On a per capita basis, we are the 7th wealthiest state in the nation. But on a per capita basis, we are the lowest. We are 50th in our funding of higher education. Only 8% of the university's budget is funded by the state. 80% is funded by tuition, which is why our students graduate with the highest debt in the nation. Now, our businesses are clamoring for more educated employees. For a few years, we had a business tax commission here in the state, which I was a member of. We had tax CPAs and tax lawyers. We had business owners, large and small businesses. We had a member from the Business and Industry Association that sat on it. And over those couple of years, we interviewed businesses of all sizes, small and large. And we asked them, what were the top things for why you would come here or expand here? An educated workforce was in everybody's top 5. Business taxes were not in anybody's top 5. Yet, what have we done over the last few years? We've cut business taxes and we haven't invested any more in higher education. In real dollars, not inflation numbers, we spend less on the university system now than we did 8 years ago. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. I didn't get the sorry button.
Well, I'm trying to decide because you hadn't looked over at Joanne's and stuff.
Okay.
Keep an eye on Joanne.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Lester.
Okay, yeah. My name's Lester Koff. I've been in Stratham since, 35 years, 1986. I've done a lot of international travel, etc. My background is very diverse. I got an accounting degree. When I became a division controller, it wasn't fun. I realized that I had an operational mind. And so I spent a lot of time through my career of looking at the operational side of businesses, etc. So I've been very thankful that I've have the opportunity to work internationally as corporate auditor, as a project implementing SAP, et cetera, this and that. I've not only reached across the aisle, I've reached across the continents. You name the country, the continent, I've been there, implementing very large programs, et cetera, across the world. Where a business starts in the U.S., they have an international, et cetera, ties in this, that. I went around the world to help put that together, et cetera. So I keep saying to myself that I'm trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But I've been a corporate controller, I've been corporate auditor, I've been customer service, I've been in manufacturing, logistics, sales, I've been up to corporate, I've been down at the bottom, et cetera, this and that. But basically, my main thing is, since I've been here in Stratham, this is kind of like my first time figuring out what I want to do when I grow up, right? Running for political position, but not my first time as a grassroots political activist, where I've been pushing change from the bottom up. I've been asked the question, what will you do if elected? I respond first by stating what I have already achieved as a political activist. It was mentioned green technology. I will use my background in solar energy advocate and benefactor to help our towns, residents, business, and state to further utilize carbon neutral renewable energy. What I mean by carbon neutral, I'm talking about solar, wind, hydro. Green technology will reduce utility costs, applicable tax dollars, combat climate disruption, I'm calling it disruption, and create jobs. I reduced my house utility costs and reliance on fossil fuel by 89 and 91% respectively. And I've done that in 6 years. I've testified in front of the New Hampshire House and Senate legislatures supporting and or defending existing renewable energy bills over the last several years. This past year, I basically had to be defending them, et cetera. I helped and advised several family businesses in the town of Stratham to go solar. One of the largest installations that's going to occur at the end of this month is one of the big office buildings that you see that's under construction right now, et cetera, this and that. I've been hosted by the Stratham Conservation Commission. I've done seminars, I've helped people, educate them, et cetera, to go solar. In climate disruption, in 2006, 2008, I led Stratham Grassroots Neighborhood Movement along with New Hampshire Senator Maggie Hassan and 4 other families. We created a New Hampshire Clean Air Bill and corresponding EPA safe air quality regulations on home heating wood boilers. And what I've done, I've left pictures. Okay, addiction. I personally felt and understand it grieves. I've had a son who passed abruptly with drinking, over drinking, et cetera, this and all. I've been heavy into supporting getting money out of politics with open democracy, et cetera. My wife and I, we've been demonstrating. Last year we submitted a bill to go to citizens funding. Another one will be coming out this time, et cetera.
Sorry. Since Patty missed it, I'll do it for everybody else. Thank you so much. Dan Shepard, up next.
Hello, I'm Dan Shepard. I'm running for office for the very first time. People have already told me, what are you, crazy in this political climate? You're going to try and get into this. But so far, the experience has been going to door. I recognize a bunch of faces here. I still see many that I haven't met going door to door. So one of the most enjoyable parts of this so far has been just getting out and meeting everyone in Stratham that I didn't already know. I've been in Stratham for about 4 years, but I lived right next door in Northampton for 20-some years prior to that. I want to go to Concord to see if I can make a difference. And the reason I think I can make a difference is I work very hard. I learn very fast, typically. And people have always told me that I look at problems in a very different way. I have 75 patents, so I like to think there's some truth in that. But I learn fast. I've taught myself how to file patents. I basically wrote, filed, prosecuted, and in some cases appealed and petitioned the patent office in order to get those patents. So it's a different way of looking at things that I hope I'll bring up to Concord. And I'll give one example of one thing that I've already been thinking about. There was a story on the internet of an elementary school teacher who would every Friday pass out cards to her students, say, write down the names of the 4 people you would like to sit next to next week. But what she would do then is over the weekend, she would take all of these cards, she'd look for the people that never got picked, the student that couldn't think of 4 names to put on their card, the people that always got picked, the people that over time were very popular and fell off, and from that she could identify those students that were not fitting into the class and were at risk of really falling to the wayside. And the profile of those that would become the school bullies, and that was what she was looking for. And in this day and age, even more critical, it's those students that are going to do the school violence. I've actually tracked down this teacher. Her name is Kathy Pitt. She worked at the Seagate Elementary School in Naples, Florida. I've had multiple conversations with the school already. And I would like to, as an example, bring these techniques up here to New Hampshire. Maybe bring them up to some higher grades so that not only are we trying to identify those kids that aren't fitting in and who might act out, but also the ones who aren't fitting in and turn inward, because I believe those are the ones who are going to be more susceptible to the opioid crisis. So by doing a technique like this, we might start at least addressing a part of this problem. I've already spoken also to some people at UNH, and they have projects for thesis work where they can have students develop these applications. So without any cost to the taxpayer, we would be able to create an app that could be provided to all our teachers so that the statistical work that's done underneath would be provided and done for them. And in this way, all teachers would have this tool and hopefully be able to start helping our kids, because helping the kids is one of the things that's most important to me and one of the things I really want to focus on. So I see you've had that card up for a bit.
No.
Oh, no, okay.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. So, I mean, that's just one example of things that could be done. I've also spoken to schools about, for example, the problems we have on Portsmouth Avenue. There are a number of things that could be done with queuing theory and computer modeling that we might be able to start really addressing the problems of traffic. I've spoken to people just knocking on doors. Some people tell me it can take them some days 20 minutes just to get out of their driveway because the traffic is so backed up. So there are a lot of techniques, but we should be leveraging off of some of the brilliant minds in some of these great schools we also have here in New Hampshire. So that's the stop sign. Okay. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Deborah.
Picucci. So my name is Deborah Picucci, and I'm running against Patty in that floterial seat. The way this all came about for me was quite sudden, actually. I never imagined myself sitting in this spot right now. It just sort of happened that I went to the polls on the primary day and talked to Pat afterwards because I said, what happened? There's nobody running for District 36. And he said, you know, we had a little conversation, and lo and behold, next thing I knew, I had the nomination for the Republican seat. So here I am with just maybe about a month to prepare, and I still don't feel prepared. But be that as it may, I have spent the last 20 years in high-tech sales, working for some pretty big companies like Dell and Lucent Technologies and the like, and I've had a lot of experience negotiating pretty major contracts. And the way I see my position as an account manager is I solve customers' problems. And the way I see the role of the House of Representatives, the Senate, government is to solve the problems of our state. And I feel like that is something that I could really have an impact on. And one of the reasons why I felt like this is something that I could do and why I wanted to be a part of it is because really had a lot to do with social media, to be honest with you. I see a lot of things on social media, people just complaining about the government and Trump and every other, just everything, whether you're Democrat or Republican, everybody had something to say, but nobody wants to do anything about it. They just want to sit behind a keyboard and complain. And I thought, when I saw nobody was running, I thought this is an opportunity to be the change that everybody wants to see, but nobody wants to do anything about. So I wrote my name in, and here I am.
Great, wow. Total bonus points. And this is, it's sometimes in short supply in our political situations. We'll move on to another Deborah Altschuler.
Thank you. My name is Deborah Altschuler. For the past 2 years, it has been my honor and privilege to serve the people of Stratham in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. My pledge has been to put the people of Stratham first and to work to ensure for healthy people, healthy families, and healthy communities. All of my efforts in the House have been guided by this commitment. When you sent me to Concord, I got right to work, and I'm proud to say that 4 of the bills I co-sponsored and worked very hard with fellow legislators to advocate for have been signed into law, and I am just getting started. I have been endorsed by the National Education Association, the NEA New Hampshire, because of my support for our students, teachers, and schools. I believe public tax dollars should support public schools, and I have vigorously opposed efforts to take tax money away from our local schools and to be used for vouchers for private or religious schools. Because students cannot learn and teachers cannot teach in an environment where they do not feel safe, I have supported common sense gun violence prevention measures. Those efforts have earned me the endorsement of Moms Demand Action. If I am reelected, I promise I will do everything in my power to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, while protecting the rights of responsible gun owners. Taking on the gun lobby can be daunting, but facing down a school shooter or a violent family member is worse. I have already filed legislation to bring a red flag law to our state. I am working with leaders in law enforcement, the mental health community, and fellow legislators who have actually supported past gun violence prevention efforts with their votes. We have been gathering a coalition of concerned citizens who will work to create a safer community. The days of empty talking and legislators who throw up their hands and say there's nothing we can do are over. I have already taken action, and this is happening. In my professional capacity as the community liaison for the state's largest domestic and sexual violence crisis prevention agency, I was appointed by the governor to the commission to oversee the Office of the Child Advocate, and I was honored to be part of the subcommittee nominating Dr. Moira O'Neill, who the governor has appointed as our state's first ever director of the Office of the Child Advocate. And children now have a powerful champion in Concord who puts their interests ahead of all others, and I will continue on this commission and serve the interests of New Hampshire's most vulnerable children. I'm grateful to the Sierra Club who chose to endorse me based on my efforts in voting to protect our environment and the rural character of our state. In the past 2 years, we have taken measures at both the state and federal levels to address the tragic consequences of addiction and opioid abuse destroying New Hampshire families. Most significantly, on this front, I enthusiastically joined bipartisan legislators in the House and Senate to renew the state's expanded Medicaid expansion program, which provides significant funding to treatment and recovery programs and health insurance to 50,000 New Hampshire individuals. I currently serve on the House Judiciary Committee and have found myself constantly pushing back against efforts to infringe upon women's reproductive freedoms and body autonomy. Those efforts earned me a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood and an endorsement from Emily's List. I will continue. Thank you. I will continue to work tirelessly to ensure family planning decisions are made only by a woman and her doctor, and government agents have no place in that relationship. I will continue to call for civility in the House and urge members to participate in the sexual harassment prevention training that is now voluntary and poorly attended. We'll finish the rest later. So close.
Deborah Pacucci she still wins the brevity contest. Let's see what Pat Abrami
I'm not
can
going
do
to win. I'm
for
not going to
us.
win the brevity contest.
Pat Abrami.
So, State Rep Pat Abrami, and it's been an honor to serve you for the past 4 terms, 8 years. I've served as long as Patty has in the House of Representatives. I'm currently the Vice Chair of Ways and Means. I've been the Vice Chair for the past 4 years. I grew up in Long Island, New York. My dad was a union carpenter. My mom came across through Ellis Island from Italy. I went to the University of Buffalo, where I received my bachelor's and master's degree in industrial engineering operations research. 43-year career as a partner, owner, and principal of Applied Management Systems, a healthcare operations consulting firm, and I just retired in April. 2 children, both through college, out on their own, one in California, one in Maine, and I'm a 35-year resident of Stratham, where my kids did grow up, 4 streets up to the right, Tall Pines Drive. I'm running again because I want to keep New Hampshire, New Hampshire. We have the best state in the union, and it takes constant vigilance to keep us that. And we are always ranked #1 in quality of life, every single year when compared to other states. The other states should emulate us, not the other way around. We shouldn't be emulating other states. States should take lessons from New Hampshire. Our ethos of personal responsibility, work ethic, self-reliance, but coupled with our ability to help people in need, true need, with a hand up. That really does work in New Hampshire. So why should you vote for me again? Well, I'm a proven leader up in the House. There's no question about it. I'm Vice Chair of Ways and Means, as I said. I chair numerous commissions. Right now, I'm chair of the Marijuana Commission. Not easy task, 17 members trying to come to terms with marijuana legalization in the state. I'm chairing the Municipal Assessment of Utility Commission. No easy task. I've got the utilities on one side. I've got municipalities and the assessors on another side, trying to bridge that gap. That's what I do. Then I'm also on the Commission on Apportionment, Tax Apportionment with Patty, actually, among others. I'm on many, many commissions, and I'm always, I chair many subcommittees in the House, and I also am the lead in numerous conference committees with the Senate at the end of the year. I'm highly respected by both Republicans and Democrats up there. I have as much of a relationship with the minority leader as I do the majority leader. But my main thrust is that I'm a problem solver. Some of us talked about being problem solvers. Let me give you examples. I had a bill a couple of years ago, landlord-tenant secondary agreement bill. What do I know about landlords and stuff? But I know one thing. I know how to bring people together. I work with the landlord groups. I work with the tenant groups. We hammered at it week after week. We crafted legislation that both sides could agree to, and that bill passed and was signed into law by Governor Hassan, actually. Bills come to us through Ways and Means. There was one, we discovered that airline registration fees for a large plane, $300,000 for a small corporate jet. Now, that sounds silly, but no one knew this. But what we did was scared away everybody who wanted a new or large plane away from our state. Pease Air Force Base, Pease Airport and Nashua were screaming, we have hangar space, we want planes here. I was the one last fall who had who brought 5 meetings, brought small airports, large airports, small plane owners, large airliners, all the different parties together, and we hammered out a compromise to change those fees. Guess what? Planes are coming here. I got a call the other day from Pease. They tell me that the phone's ringing off the hook. Planes are coming here. So, and the other thing I do is I do. Oh boy.
Finish your sentence. And I won't hit the start.
Well, I'll fill in everybody else. I got plenty more to say. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And the hope is, obviously, that we'll be able to get a little deeper into some of these things when our audience asks their questions. So who wants to go first?
Thanks for coming out, candidates. New Hampshire is one of the most permissive states when it comes to gun ownership. The few laws we do have on the books are being tossed out by lawmakers in the current majority. One notable example of one of the gun law rollbacks is when Governor Sununu signed into law the repeal of concealed carry permits, handing a victory to the NRA, which heavily lobbied lawmakers for this repeal. We know from data about countries that have nowhere near the levels of gun violence that we have here in the U.S. that gun regulation works.
I'm going to have to ask you to ask a question.
Here in New Hampshire, anyone who can legally possess a firearm can carry it openly or concealed. You don't need a license to purchase. Firearms don't need to be registered.
That's not a question. I need you to ask a question.
Okay. So while no single set of laws will eliminate all gun violence, will the candidates here tonight support legislation that restores the concealed carry permit, requires licensing and registration for gun ownership, just like we have for car ownership, requires a waiting period, legislation that raises the minimum age for firearms purchase and possession, which here in the state of New Hampshire is currently 18. Will the candidates here tonight support legislation that gives law enforcement the ability to remove guns from someone who is a danger to the community or on him himself?
Just narrow it down. So, candidate, obviously, but something brief about your stance on regulation in New Hampshire. Go ahead, Patty.
I do support common sense gun legislation. One thing that most people don't realize is here in New Hampshire, in a school, anybody who's allowed to be in the school can carry any kind of a weapon. Just think if you've got children who are in middle school. Somebody, if you're looking at me like I'm crazy, it's true. Somebody who's coming in for a parent-teacher conference, that's coming in for, any kind of performance, if they have a reason to be there, they can have a semi-automatic weapon over their shoulder. And the principal cannot stop them. So those are things that I would like to change.
Yes, I would say yes to everything that you mentioned there, Heidi, et cetera. I would support. I consider gun safety very personal. At a very young age, my brother, when he was a teenager, accidentally shot himself with 22. I ended up helping change his wounds. So when I see the hole from the front going to the back, et cetera, I think of his kids in high school who want more safety, et cetera, going at the school and practicing drills.
So
I've also been...
Would you support more regulation?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
And I also...
No, also.
Are we talking
Not
about
right
this
now.
one?
We have a lot of people, and that was I get that was a complex question, and we can go back around with it, but
Okay.
maybe fewer stories and more answers. But we don't have to go in a line. Does somebody else want to go next?
Okay.
Go ahead, Pat.
Okay, so, yeah, I voted to abolish the concealed carry law. You realize that Vermont never had concealed carry ever for the centuries that Vermont existed. More and more states are getting rid of these concealed carry laws because it's only the good citizens, the honest citizens, that actually go get a permit to carry concealed. And these concealed carry laws go back to two turns of a century ago when the immigrants were coming in and those already here didn't like the immigrants having guns, and they wanted to make sure they knew that they were concealed, so they wanted to have a concealed carry permit, and that's the evolution. But one by one, states are doing away with it because, again, it's more of an imposition on those. And to be honest with you, most gun owners in our state are very responsible people, and in our town are very responsible people with guns. And if you have criminal intent, you're not going to go to your police chief and say, "Give me a permit." it just doesn't work that way. They're not gonna go, they're just gonna carry the gun no matter what. So that's the reason I voted that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I jotted down about 5 things: licensing, registration, waiting periods, raising the age of purchase, and removing guns from people who may harm themselves or others around them. That's the legislation that I've already filed. So yes, I support that because I filed that. So I'm hoping that I will get support for that legislation too. And also the other 4. I am a member, an active participating member of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus in the House of Representatives. We've been at work for about 6 months putting together legislation to address every one of those things that you've mentioned over the course of the next biennium. So I hope to be able to work with other legislators to hammer out what works for New Hampshire, because we pass our laws for what works for New Hampshire, not what other people are doing.
Thank you.
When the Founding Fathers created the Second Amendment, they did something kind of unique. They said that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, because they knew that this could be something that a government, if it ever went rogue, for lack of a better word, would want to target. That both makes it difficult for any changes, and it also emphasizes the need to have the Second Amendment, which I'm in favor of. Congress does get to regulate commerce, so things that are not a firearm, for example, bump stocks, they can certainly regulate, and I do favor that. But the right to protect yourself, which was really what the Second Amendment was all about, not for hunting, is something that is an integral part of the fabric of this country. That being said, this is why, as I said in my opening statement, why some things we've got to find ways to address them. So as I said, for addressing issues of school violence, we've got to find other ways to do it without necessarily attacking the Second Amendment. But out of the 40 largest school massacres, only 14 were in the U.S. The other 26 were in other countries where a lot of them don't even have guns. But people have done it. Even in London this past April, the mayor is now proposing, as their murder rate exceeded New York City, that they start restricting carrying knives in London. It was, but
it was a long sentence, but it was one. I see the loopholes that we find here.
So I might reclaim a tiny little bit of my time.
Okay.
Just a little bit, I promise.
That might be your bonus point.
It's just a tiny little bit. So my father was a police chief both in New Hampshire and Maine. And so I grew up around guns, not afraid of them. In fact, I have guns. I am a proponent of the Second Amendment. However, there are places where I don't believe guns belong. And without something, we have no means of keeping guns out of the hands of the bad guys. We have no means of punishing the bad guys when they abuse guns. So I have to say that conditionally, or with conditions, I am in favor of some sort of gun legislation. However, it's conditional, and there needs to be a lot of discussion. And more importantly, I'm in favor of education, both for children and adults, particularly people who are afraid of guns. People need to be educated. And as Deborah said, we need to have prohibitions against from keeping guns from schools, and we need to have systems in place for, what was the term? I can't remember the term you used.
Red flag laws?
Well, the red flag laws, but there was another phrase you used that I can't think of it. But in any case, that's where I stand right now.
Very nice.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No,
something
I'll remember it.
Yeah.
You seriously didn't really go much over your
okay,
time.
Thank you.
You won that one. I'm just going to see if there's somebody who wants to ask a question who hasn't asked one yet tonight. Go ahead.
So, Pat, Representative Lovejoy said some really interesting statistics about higher education funding and its contribution to the brain drain that New Hampshire is facing. We do have one of the oldest populations in the country. So what I'm really interested to hear about is how you would attract and retain young New Hampshireites.
Well, I'll jump in. We're not Boston, we're not New York City, first off. I mean, we do have Portsmouth, we do have some attractions to bring people back. On Ways and Means, we hear every year from economists and demographers. And this one demographer keeps on saying that the phenomenon that he's starting to see now is that, yes, our kids leave the state. Once they get married and start having kids, and they say, where do I want to raise my kids? They're starting to come back to New Hampshire. Now, right now, we have a lack of jobs. That's our biggest problem. We don't have enough employees to fill all the jobs that we have. So I think it's naturally going to happen that we're going to start seeing it. And I think our aging statistics are kind of inflated by the fact that we do, believe it or not, I think a lot of you recognize this, a lot of people retire here. They come from other states here. If you go around the lakes, I mean, we got $1 million houses around the lakes. So those are all in the statistics. I mean, I don't know what you do to, we have pretty good jobs here. I voted for the Army, the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute in Manchester to have a renaissance there of growing kidneys and all sorts of organs and things. We continue to bring business in, and we should be able to attract people back here. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that over the last bunch of years.
Thank you, Pat.
You mentioned Army. New Hampshire is really positioning itself to be a bioscience tech hub. Yet, if you go up to UNH and you look at the bioscience labs, they were from the 1960s. They are deplorable. UNH had proposed in the last capital budget. They gave two different proposals to do it over multiple years or to do it over a shorter period of time to upgrade that facility, to add on to it. I really was supporting doing it quicker. Well, guess what? We didn't put $1 in the capital budget this last time, not $1 for higher ed. If we want to keep our kids here, we need to have quality education. And I'm not saying UNH is not a quality school, but the cost of it is just too high because we don't support higher ed. We need to do much better. 8% of the budget coming from the state is not enough.
So I'd like to jump in here. So public education is huge. I will echo what Representative Lovejoy said. When my third child is applying for colleges. I've had 2 children go through college, and when the financial aid packages come to our house, we got $0 from the university system of New Hampshire. 0. Both of my oldest children have gone to school in other states, and I'm fortunate that they moved back, and so are you all, because they're amazing. But it's unusual. So when you send a student out of state to go to school somewhere else where they get a better financial aid package and they do their internships in another state, it's really hard to entice them to come back, particularly when we have a state that doesn't support rail, doesn't support public transportation, doesn't have child care credits for young families, and doesn't support family medical leave insurance so that those young families can take care of new babies, can take care of their aging parents, can take care of each other and when they have medical catastrophic issues. So these are the kind of things that we need to build into our infrastructure in New Hampshire so that we bring and keep our young people and bring young families back.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Green energy, green technology, okay, it's the fastest growing across the United States as far as jobs. A lot of your eastern states, New Jersey, Maryland, New York, they're looking at wind turbines out there. They're creating a new industry, a new technology. If we invested money in the future, we would have people come and they'd go to school. In the schools, if we put in technical stuff, what's growing right now is young kids, like in revision, installing solar, because a lot of us older ones can't get up on those roofs and move the machinery, et cetera, this and that. So it's happening in front of our face, but our state is pushing and not allowing it to grow.
So with respect to all my peers who have great ideas, I would also like to point out just one thing. Trade schools. Everybody's talking about higher education, but we have no trades, and that is the area that is most suffering in our education system today, is higher education in the trades. And that would be a number one, I don't know about number one, but it would be a huge draw for people to come back or stay in New Hampshire, is to have a means of earning a living that doesn't require them to go to college.
But I'll just add in that with today's youth, a lot of what really attracts them is, as Patrick pointed out, when they start families, is the quality of life here, which is a huge advantage that New Hampshire has, and not one that's easily replicated by some other state, such that we could lose that advantage once we show everyone what an advantage it is. But also the technology, if we could do more to really enhance the technology in our schools and attract high-tech companies here. I think Patrick alluded to that with the companies for the 3D printing of body parts for surgical transplants and so on. I think that would be another thing to focus on, to try and keep the kids here.
That's great. Go ahead.
A lot of discussion here about money, basically, and that's what politics is. It's revenue versus expenditures. Patty would like to spend more on education. There was a recent editorial in the Union Leader where the people at UNH ought to look at Purdue. I'm a Purdue alumni. Purdue hasn't raised their tuition in 7 years, and there's a way they do that. UNH, my wife's granddaughter goes to UNH right now. UNH is spending too much money for lots of things, okay? But my question comes down to the basics, you know, revenue versus expenditure type thing. We pride ourselves in New Hampshire, some of us, of having no broad-based taxes at all, okay? So I'd like to ask each one of you, would you support a broad-based tax or not? Would you sign the, quote, pledge saying, I will not support a sales tax, income tax, or any other broad-based tax? Patty?
I would not sign a pledge, but I don't believe in pledges. But
Well, come on.
I do not intend to vote for a sales tax, a broad-based sales tax or an income tax.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're on record.
Okay, I think very different. I think out of the box, okay? If I look at UNH, to me, I have a spending challenge, I have a funding challenge, and I have a revenue challenge. The revenue is what I'm charging to my students. The funding problem is what the state is supporting. The third piece is the cost that the university is spending. For me to give a broad judgment on what needs to be fixed, I would want to look at all those. The other night they mentioned about there's a funding project going on UNH. What does that look like? Do they have metrics? I was at Bursar State University in New York, and I helped turn a university around because they had poor operating procedures, cash flow, so they would have been bankrupt if they didn't have the state supporting them.
Lester?
So I'd look at the total picture.
But education is just only one thing we spend money on in the state. Would you support a broad-based tax or not?
To me, it's putting the cart in front of the horse, okay?
That's an answer. Deborah?
So thank you.
First, Deborah
Deborah,
A instead of Deborah
do
P.
you want-
Go ahead,
okay,
Deborah
go
A.
ahead.
We'll just
No,
go down the
just
line.
go down the
for
line.
this.
Did you say Deborah P first?
No, Deborah A.
Deborah A first, okay. So, thank you for bringing up that government has revenue and expenditures, and the difference between running a business and running a government is government has responsibilities to its people, and those are
So does business.
All right,
we
we're
are not
gonna go back
making
and
money.
forth.
We are not making money in government. We are serving people in government. And so our expenditures are based on what our priorities are. And in New Hampshire, our revenues should reflect, what we take in should be spent on those priorities. And we shouldn't be giving away our revenues before we've met our priorities
Deborah?
and met our budget. So I do not support broad-based taxes and have not voted for them. But I also want to be very clear that our last budget did not reflect our priorities because it gave away money before we met our responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. Deborah P.
And I'll talk about that with you later.
No, I would not support, and yes, I would sign a pledge.
No broad-based taxes.
Sign a pledge?
Sure.
I got to give a longer answer than that. So there was a bill, there was a constitutional amendment on the ballot about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, to prevent New Hampshire from ever having an income tax. Some of you remember this. The vote was 57% of the people in New Hampshire said they didn't want an income tax, 57%. Then when I talked to people, there were others who supported that but didn't want to mess around with the Constitution. You know, some people just don't want to for any reason. Well, it's 60%. This is just what New Hampshire, this is who we are. And in relation to the business tax cuts, I hate to tell you this, but revenues, business tax revenue exceeded year over year, $142 million more from 17 to 18. After we started cutting the business taxes. Business is booming in New Hampshire and the revenues are flowing in big time. So again, I agree, it's priorities. We have to set priorities and how we spend it. And I'm no broad-based tax, I'm on record, no broad-based tax. But it's how we manage it, how we manage the money, and setting proper priorities. I agree with that.
Great.
And we do a very good job of efficiency in our government, trying to keep our government efficient and spend the money wisely for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Another question. Oh my gosh, so many people. Go ahead. Yes, you.
Representatives, I have spent, and other candidates, I have spent the better part of a year now wandering around the state asking people questions about the things that we should or should not be doing. What I need from you is a commitment, not necessarily to spend money, but to change how we go through the process of educating people in this state, really from the K through 12 system, and not so much from the higher education system, because I can assure you that if we do anything with the business profits tax to raise money to give it to UNH so we can lower premium, those students who will be educated still aren't staying in the state of New Hampshire. The reason, the issue that the students have, the millennial students, young students who I spoke with today at Central Middle School, they look for diversity within the state. And they're leaving because they do not feel that this state has the diversity that they seek. I speak to the businesses from 6 Hour, Delta Dental, New Hampshire Ball Bearings, for the purposes of going out and trying to recruit minority candidates to those businesses.
What's the question?
They tell me that we need to change the diversity, and to do so we have to educate the students, K through 12, and their instructors. Will you support my efforts to make sure that that happens? Because if we don't do that, the state that we have is so old that we're never going to grow economically.
Let's get answers to, would you support educating K through 12 students? I still don't fully understand.
So I hear you and I understand what you're asking, and yes, the state of New Hampshire should be integrating cultural competency and raising our game. We can do better in New Hampshire. We can train our educators, we can train our business leaders, and we can bring that to our students to raise our cultural competency quotient in this state. it's a necessary way, necessary thing we need to do to bring more people in and grow the state. And it'll happen through the younger families, and it'll happen through.
Okay, Deb.
Yeah,
you're
I'll let you
okay.
go.
You're for it.
I really, yeah, like I want to talk about cultural competency with you later
I
too.
just want
So
to check and see if the rest of our candidates fully understand the specific question that's being asked. Only because I wasn't 100%.
I have to apologize because I work in a multiracial industry and I live in a biracial family. So I didn't know this was an issue, probably just because I have blinders on. But yes, I would support it.
I want to give you a recommendation. I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation, which is HP, back in the 90s, and there was a big push to get women engaged as managers. And you know what the business did? They put on all their managers that part of their goal was that they had to bring a woman into a leadership position. A lot of women came in. It was great. I wish they kind of did that for people of color, but it worked. Okay? Tell your businesses that's what they need to do. Make them held responsible. If they're no promotion, no getting diversity.
I'd like to thank Rogers for all the work that he's been doing. I think asking the questions and getting people to look at the diversity or lack of diversity here in New Hampshire. And I know what you're saying about students wanting more diversity. My son went to college outside of New Hampshire specifically for that reason. He wanted to go to school in a more diverse culture because the world is much more diverse. Anything that I can do to help you, Rogers, I'm on board.
Great. Dan and Kat, anything to add?
From my background, doing sort of inventive problem solving, diversity is always a plus. The more different ways and different backgrounds and different pasts that people have to look at a problem, the more options you're going to have for solving problems. And I think the youth today expect that when they go to school. And I mean, we know each other somewhat well, and I'd love to hear more about it, but I'm certainly in favor of anything that increases the diversity. I mean, I have my daughter who's 2 years old in a toddler program, but in the class she's in, one kid speaks German, 2 or 3 are speaking Chinese. We've got just about every background in the class that I can possibly imagine. So I guess in some places it's happening, but if we can accelerate it, I would certainly be interested to hear more, Rogers.
Great.
Rogers, of course, I'll support you, you know that. So, my friend, so let me just tell you a story about New York State real quick. I'm on the Dean's Advisory Council of the School of Engineering at the University of Buffalo, the flagship of the SUNY system. And every time we meet, we talk about getting more women faculty into the problem is, every university and around the country is trying to get more women engineering faculty, so it's a very hard thing. So what we've started to do there is we've started with the younger kids. The school is going out, trying to educate young ladies and other minorities in what engineering is. I mean, you have to start there. Try to get them excited about it and want to be involved in it. And it seems to be working. And they even had a summer camp for young ladies that were in high school. It was an engineering camp where they did different experiments and things like that were interesting, and trying to get them involved. So those are the kind of things. I don't know if those are the kind of things you're thinking about, but I have some experience in that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Education-related question. SB 193 was a big talked about vote all last year in the sessions, and it would take away about $3,700 that the state gives towns like Stratham. If each student gets that, it would take it away and give it to people if they want to send their kids to religious or private schools. So when that happens, local property taxes would increase. I wanted to know which candidates would support SB 193, and how would you come back to Stratham if it did pass, and talk to us about when our property taxes go up because of that.
Well, let me go on. I'll go first. I voted for Senate Bill 193. You say, why did I do that? Because I view I view education through the prism of the children, not through the system, but through the children. Now, there are many in this room who can send their children to private school. And guess what happens when you send your child to private school? That $3,500, the average for the state's around $4,400, $4,500. For Stratham, RSU is a little less. So let's say the $4,500. When you send your kid to private school, that $4,500 stops flowing to our district as well. So all we did with Senate Bill 193 is you had to have a certain income. These were for lower income people, to try to allow them to have some funding to be able to send their kids to private school as well. And that's why I voted for it. And to be honest with you, if I thought it would harm our public education, and you can't believe everything you hear, okay, on this issue, that if I thought for one moment that it was going to hurt our public education, I wouldn't have voted for it. Okay, all we're trying to do is help those in lesser means to have the same opportunity, or at least a step towards that same opportunity of those who have means. That's the basis of my vote.
I voted against SB 193. I serve on Finance. Finance had a committee that worked on this bill for about 3 to 4 months. And even the Republican chair of Finance spoke on the floor against this bill because it was going to be hurting our local towns. And I don't believe that public funds should be used for private schools, whether they be religious or not. Public dollars should go to fund public schools.
So, yeah, I think one of the things when you're looking at this problem, there are many ways to look at this problem. Obviously, we don't want to do anything to hurt our public schools. I went to public school, and I loved it. It did a great job. So we don't want to do anything to hurt it. But some people are not a good fit for a public school. But rather than focus on what money we're getting for the school, speaking we as a school system, don't think of it so much as what are we getting in terms of money. That's not our money as a school system. It's the money to educate the children. So if a child leaves and goes to a private school, our school system actually saves about $15,000 because that's what it costs to educate that child. Now, if that child is educated if that education is paid for by their parent, it costs no taxpayer anything. You're shaking your head no. Am I not?
I just don't agree.
Well, okay, and I understand that. It's a tough question because you've got to look at this in a way that does not hurt the public school. If one child leaves and that money goes away, the classroom is still there and it's still whole. You can't just say, well, we're going to spend less on the classroom when that cost doesn't change. So if you look at it on a student by student basis, that is a problem, and I do agree with you. On the other hand, if say a whole classroom were to leave, that cost could be saved. It wouldn't impact all the other students. All the other classrooms would remain unchanged and have the same funding. So there's going to be a balance as you are in between those 2 points.
Deborah A.
Yes. So I voted against Senate Bill 193, and I look at public tax dollars through the prism of a public servant, and those tax dollars belong in the public schools. And something to remember is that here, our students, our youngest students, have access to a brick and mortar public school down the street. They have access to a charter school. We also support an online public school. There are 3 different options right now for students that our public tax dollars support. And additionally, for a lot of us, I know that from my own children's experience, the trajectory of evaluating a student's performance has changed wildly, and we now work with competency-based learning. And so students are met where they are, regardless of the grade they're in, and then brought up to competency. So this is a different way of going to school than a lot of us who went to school in the 70s and 80s, and a wildly different way of going to school than those who went to school in the 50s and 60s. So I would encourage you to go to a public school or look at VLAX or go to the charter school where our public dollars are being spent. And I'm not going to support putting them in private schools where there is no oversight.
Thank you.
I've done a lot of research on this subject because I have a lot of teachers in my family and friends circle, and I do not support it for numerous reasons, taxes being one of them, for the same reasons Deb mentioned. Deborah, sorry. I go by
Also
Deb.
a Deborah.
So, yeah, I go by Deb, so it's my natural go-to. I was met with some opposition by actually another Republican who used to serve in the House. But I feel very strongly that public funds should go to funding public schools and not private. And that's just, keep it short and sweet.
Thank you.
I'm open to further discussion on the issue, though.
Lester, do you have something to add?
I wouldn't support money going to the schools either type of thing. So I agree with you. There's adequate structure and education out there that they can go to. So.
Great. I think we probably have time for one more question to allow some mingling time, unless people don't want to mingle and just want to keep asking questions, which is fine. I saw that hand back there first.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, you guys. We really appreciate it. And for everybody that is unable to be here, the fact that we're able to share this through video is amazing. When this gentleman in the front row talked about expenditures and revenue, both Deborah and Lester, you talked about spending money in our government on priorities, and I'm getting a sense that you both have different priorities. So I'm wondering, not to exclude the other candidates, please chime in as well if you have something different to say, but I would love to hear from the two of you about what your priorities are in spending to help educate us that are going to be voting.
Yeah, I think outside the box all the time, and I come from a business perspective. So if you use the scenario like if a business, do we reduce their business tax, which the business can make, a profit by just from a tax, or do we give the business some type of incentive, okay, that we could also tie into, we're going to get something back for the state. That's basically how this money for revenue, for solar, et cetera. All your businesses out there, they're the first ones to grab and get the money for renewable energy. So they're looking at a total economic thing. They're getting the same impact or even better, okay, enhancing their business, helping us, helping our clients, et cetera, then giving them a tax credit break, okay? So to me, you got to look at, I see a lot of companies as they grow, et cetera, this and that, as they grow, they need help, okay? Their operations, et cetera, this and that. So a business is always looking how to become efficient. I think you can apply the same thing to a university, to a nonprofit, to whatever, et cetera, this and that. So that's when I said the UNH type of a thing. Just, I don't know what the problem is. I say they got 3 challenges.
Lester?
Yes, fine.
Can you just give us, maybe a top 3 priorities? I think that's what she's getting at is.
I totally agree with you. I think
I answer your question.
In terms of priorities, I think that there was maybe an indication that we are spending money on different priorities based upon whether it's the political party or just differences of what's most important to the state. And since you all are representing us as constituents of Stratham and the state of New Hampshire, I'm curious to know what your priorities are to help me make a best educated decision.
So maybe if each candidate could sort of say like their top 2 or 3 priorities that they would put up there? Okay. Lester, since you started, do you want to tell us your top 3?
I think my very top is getting money out of politics, okay? Because if we get money out of politics, we get corporate out of politics.
Okay, just your 3. Sorry. So if you want to say 3. without the explanations.
Okay. The second thing is investment in green energy. My third, I think, is basically gun sense. And I'm saying sense. Okay.
Thank you. Deborah A., since you were...
So I want to answer the question as asked, and I will give you but the question was, what's the priorities in spending? And my answer is that we can't spend money on things if we're not bringing money in. And when we passed our last budget, we had to cut things that were part of our priorities, like our disability wait list, like the Department of Youth and Families for DCYF for children, like renewable energies, because we gave away money in a tax break for businesses that they didn't ask for. But it was a giveaway. So my money, what I would like if we had taken the money that we were supposed to be taking in and not giving it away before we met our responsibilities, would be fully funding the alcohol fund so that we can do alcohol and drug prevention programs like we are supposed to by the Constitution at 5%. I would like to spend our money on renewable energies because that's a responsible way to spend our tax dollars. And I would like for us to spend our money on education in a way that is responsible, K through college. So there's 3.
All right, Deborah P.
I can't ask questions.
We're going to take a break and you'll be able to ask people questions individually.
I would say, not in any particular order, my priorities would be healthcare, and that could go in various different directions, but particularly mental health and Medicaid, Medicare, that type of thing. Education, and particularly in the trades, I'd like to see that come back or be expanded in New Hampshire, and renewable energy, perhaps in some sort of subsidies to consumers to be able to bring renewable energy to their homes, because it is very expensive to do that, if anybody's researched it. Those would be my priorities.
Great. Dan?
Just a few.
Well, certainly the issues relating to our children, whether it be through the education, through family courts, there are issues there. Those are really the priorities that I'd like to pursue. Certainly in keeping our youth here in New Hampshire, we would want to maintain our infrastructure and the other things, keep the businesses good and so on, that will attract them and keep them here. But as far as, I guess that's 3, but it's a balancing act. I mean, really the bottom line is not how much can we spend, it's how efficiently can we spend it, and can we focus it on the interests of the people of New Hampshire. I mean, there are lots of things that can be spent on, and we don't want to spend it inefficiently or on like sidewalks that really
Okay, that's a town issue. Please come to local voter information night in March before town meeting. And
I'm not saying that specifically that sidewalk, but in other words, spending it on things that don't make sense is certainly a priority, not of spending, but of not spending.
Patty?
I'm bouncing around. Yes, one of the issues of being on finance is you see, so many programs come to us that by spending money now, we would save the money later. We need to spend our money efficiently. I mean, one of the examples I can think of is drug courts. We put drug courts in every county. That is keeping people out of prison. And so sometimes spending money in a new program can help you save money elsewhere. I mean, we actually spend more on the Department of Corrections than we do higher ed. Obviously, I am concerned about education our mental health system, and really issues to do with children. The fact that our DCYF people should have 12 cases, and they had 60. We've got them down to 40, so we're getting better. But there's ways that we need to more efficiently spend our money.
Oh, boy. So, if you're talking about these tax cuts, these business tax cuts, I quoted you last year. First 3 months of this year, we're 31 million ahead, which is, if it keeps up this pace, we're 120 million ahead this year. The tax cuts worked, okay? It's creating more revenue for the state. In this budget, we have $57 million additional to developmental services. We decided that we were going to start funding more to developmental services. Now, my top three, education. I think education is the most important thing. I have no problem funding education even more, because that's how the kids get their start, and education is key to the future. Mental health was discussed with the senators. Mental health, we are behind, but I'll tell you this: every state has the same issue, no matter how much revenue comes in. But I've consulted in hospitals all these years, and I can tell you every emergency room study I ever did, there's backlog of mental health patients waiting for placement in a bed somewhere. It's just the way it is. But I think we can do better in mental health, though. And then, of course, the opioid crisis, it still looms out there, and we need to continue to fund that. Thank you.
It's so frustrating when everybody has questions and you want to talk, but these guys have been so great. Sitting up here, if you think it's a long time to sit in those chairs, sitting up here is even harder. So I would like to thank certainly every single one of you, definitely every single one of our candidates for all of their time and efforts and being so candid with us tonight. We have decaf coffee, we have coffee and tea, we have some great refreshments. So I hope that you'll stay, take the opportunity to ask additional questions, have conversations with our candidates. And thank you all for coming.